Attacks in the Red Sea risk a wider war. Bipolar world redux. UN Ambassador to the United Nations Chris Lu called on the United Nations Security Council to act over the issue of the Houthi attacks against Red Sea shipping. Ambassador Lu noted that the Houthis have carried out 20 attacks since November 19th, including an attack over the weekend involving the U.S. Navy that resulted in 10 rebels being killed, and the Houthis attacking the U.S. warship with 2 anti-ship missiles that failed to damage the warship. The Houthis have stepped up their attacks since the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, pledging their support to attack Israel. But recently, the increased tempos of the attacks in the Red Sea risked escalating a war in the Middle East, including into the Persian Gulf. These attacks by the Houthis not only increase the risk of war, but also demonstrates the new dynamics of a new bipolar world. Houthi rebels are based in Yemen and have been rebelling against the officially recognized government since 2014. The Houthi rebellion is regarded as an Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy war, with both countries significantly involved in the rebellions. This is a charge the Iranians deny. The decision to ease sanctions against Iran and allowing them to sell oil as part of the Biden administration attempt to gain favor with Iran to agree to the resumption of the Iran nuclear agreement. That's the agreement that Trump administration exited. This has allowed Iran to increase their support of the rebel movement. This funding has increased the capability of the rebels to expand their war outside of the rebellion with the government of Yemen. 15% of international trade flows through the Red Sea, so the Houthi attacks are of serious economic concern. The alternative is that international trade can reroute away from the Suez Canal and go around the Cape of Good Hope, adding about 10 days to the average trip. 12 countries have issued a statement outside of the UN resolution calling to the end of the Houthi attacks. The 12 countries will act against the Houthis. These countries include the U.S., Australia, Bahrain, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Germany, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. The declaration stated that they will not stand by while the Houthis, too, quote, threaten the lives, the global economy, and the free flow of commerce, end quote. The Russian UN ambassador Vasily Nebenzia, for his part, did not signal that the Russian government would veto any resolution against the Houthis. No veto threat is due to Iran not being mentioned in the resolution, and Nebenzia did call for an end to the Red Sea attacks. However, he did outline 2 scenarios that can be seen as a precondition to support ending the Houthis' attacks. The first was the UN Security Council to end the Yemen civil war and to end the war in Gaza, with this being the preferred scenario. The second scenario that he states is what the U.S. and the Allies want, and that's to escalate and use force in the Red Sea to end the attacks. This scenario, in Nebenzia's opinion, risks a wider war in the region and delay any settlement on the Yemen civil war. This seems to indicate that the Russians will not support any collective UN action in the Red Sea, making any use of force outside of the UN authority. The Houthis responded to the 12-country statement by launching an unmanned drone packed with explosives that did not hit any ships but did explode in the sea lanes. The Houthis seemed undeterred by the gathering naval force in the Red Sea, and international shipping companies are concerned by the lack of deterrence. As a result, 33% of shipping traffic that would normally transit through the Red Sea are opting to go around Africa. The Iranians have also deployed a warship into the Red Sea in response to the U.S. Navy sinking Houthi boats over the weekend, and the U.S. call for the proactive in attacking launch sites in Yemen. The introduction of the Iranian warship to the region and Iran's continued threat to close the Strait of Hormuz threatens to widen the war to include the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, and the Arabian Peninsula. The situation in the region has the typical sides are being drawn up. The Houthi rebels' weapons are predominantly supplied by the Iranians and the North Koreans, both who are also suppliers to Hamas and Russia in its war in Ukraine. An additional coincidence, the Russian position at the UN is also one that supports the Houthis, Iranians, and Hamas rebels in their war in Gaza. China is highly reliant on international trade, and its current economic headwinds would prefer not to have shipping closed in the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf, but China is signaling it will not join the navies patrolling the Red Sea unless its ships are attacked. China's position not to support the policy that is in the national best interests is probably based on not wanting to upset relations with Russia, Iran, and its position to end the war in Gaza. Also, it does not want to help the U.S. and keep the U.S. Navy distracted in the Red Sea instead of being in the South China Sea. The downside is that the Chinese policy will have a negative impact on its attempts to get the Saudis to agree to trade oil in the yuan instead of U.S. dollars. If the war in the Red Sea escalates, China will have to decide either in its economic best interest or act in support of its traditional partners and scuttle its Saudi initiatives in the process. Russian President Vladimir Putin, after his invasion of Ukraine and in response to the international sanctions against it, further pushed a goal towards a bipolar global order like what was experienced during the Cold War. The forming of alliances due to the Red Sea crisis does reflect Russia's view that the world needs to form its blocs to contest U.S. and its allies' hegemony. This leaves China in a strange place, in that it is closer aligned to the Russian position, but is it willing to be led by the Russians or lead the bloc, or is it going to go its own way? Though not the cause of the ongoing issues in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine has disrupted the world order. Russia has formed relations to help it in its war, and they, in turn, are taking action that also serve the Russian interest. It is in the Russian and Chinese interest to have the U.S. distracted by far-flung wars so it cannot focus exclusively in the war in Ukraine or exclusively pivot to focus on the Pacific to counter China. Russia does not need a widening conflict, but the threat of a widening conflict to fulfill its ends in an anti-U.S. bloc and keep American power divided in far-flung points. The question is, will the new Russian-associated bloc be able to keep a Middle East war from widening because it is easy for tensions to get out of control? Whatever the result, the cause is clear enough in that the post-Cold War policies by both the East and West failed to provide long-term prosperity or security, and the coalescing back into a bipolar world that many had hoped would have ended forever 30 years ago.